Arratsaldeon, danori. Hemen gurekin zaudetenoi eta baita ere online jarraitzen ari zareten guztioi, ongi etorririk beroena, ezea ere bai gaurko Donostia Sustainability Forumeko elkarrizketa honetara. Donostia Sustainability Forum es un marco de encuentro que busca hacer accesible la ciencia y el conocimiento de algunos de los grandes retos que tenemos como sociedad, como son la crisis climática, la pérdida de biodiversidad o aspectos relacionados con bioética. Todo ello desde una perspectiva interdisciplinar, como muestran los ponentes que tenemos hoy aquí. Para ello, para poner en marcha Donostia Sustainability Forum, para llevar adelante nuestro trabajo, contamos con el apoyo y la colaboración inestimable de la Fundación BBVA, la Sociedad Pública de Gestión IOBE, la Diputación de Guipúzcoa y el Ayuntamiento de Donosti. Eta gaurkoan gurekin, ingurumen komunikazioaren bi aditu, bi izen nabarmen ditugu, biak BBVA Fundazioko saridunak, eta biak ere MIT, Massachusettseko Teknologia Institutoko ikerlari izandakoak ere bai. Caty Arévalo, eskarmentu handiko kazetaria, komunikatzailea, F agentziako korrespontsala eta BBVA Fundazioko biodibertsitatearen kontserbaziorako saridun izandakoa. Eta Matt McGrath, ibilbide profesional luzea, gaur egun klima korrespontsala da BBC-n, erresuma batuko BBC-n. BBVA biofilia saria jaso zuen, ingurumen arazo konplexuak komunikatzeko gaitasuna aitortuz. Eta beste barik, beraiekin utziko dizuet. Thank you so much to both of you. The floor is yours.
Thank you.
Buenas tardes. Muchas gracias. Es un placer estar aquí en Donosti con un buen amigo que ha llegado a ser un buen amigo a través del periodismo y del periodismo climático. Los dos llevamos más de 20 años, diría, como corresponsales climáticos de la BBC, yo de la agencia F, y hemos estado cubriendo todo tipo de informaciones ambientales, cumbres climáticas. Hemos formado parte de las mismas redes de periodistas que cubrimos estos temas a nivel internacional y estamos encantados de charlar con vosotros esta tarde. Luego seguiremos en inglés.
Okay. Gracias, Caty. Gracias por el Foro de Sostenibilidad de Donostia por invitarme. Lo siento, mi falta en español es mucho. Gracias por la invitación. Okay.
So now we continue in English. Each month we hear that the previous month was the hottest on record by a wide margin. We are experiencing more floods, more drought. High temperatures are more and more frequent. We know from the Copernicus Climate Service that this year we had surpassed the 1.5 increase in global temperature, a third of the days. That has been October, 86 days for 2023. Right now, there is no guarantee that we are gonna stop rising emission by 2025. The scientists say that we must, if we want to keep global temperature under 1.5, and then current trends in coal, oil and gas for the short and longer term are misaligned with the objectives of the Paris Agreement. This is the reality we're seeing. So my first question, Matt, is, are we in an era of faster warming?
Yeah, this is the big question in the world right now, I think, is just how bad are things? How bad are things? And are we seeing something completely different, or are we just seeing the working out of the prophecies of science over the last number of years? So I made some few little charts, not too many, just a few. And this is an interesting one because it shows the global temperature in September this year in the world, the global average temperature in the world. And you can see that September is right up here compared to the rest of the times going back. So in the instrumental record going back to 1880, this September is an extremely special month. The temperature in September in the world was warmer than July, the average July temperature between 2001 and 2010. So this is an indication of how serious the temperatures in September were. As Caty has said, we've had numerous days, about a third of all the days were above the 1.5 degrees temperature goal, if you like, a threshold written in the Paris Agreement. So this is a significant and worrying trend that we're seeing right now. We see another picture of, it doesn't want to go. Anyway, the picture in the world overall since the 1880s and since the time of the Industrial Revolution is obviously of a rising trend of temperatures because of climate change, because of the use of fossil fuels and carbon dioxide. So as you can see on this one, what scientists are really concerned about is not the actual temperature, but the actual what's called the anomaly, which is the difference between the global average temperature and the temperature back in the pre-industrial days. And this is where we are right now. And so we've seen September there. We're here in October now, so it's getting down, cooling a little bit. But the trend from this is really a concern, yeah? And what we've seen this year in Spain, here, even today, in the last couple of days here, in Donostia has been quite warm. In April in Madrid, you had temperatures, or not Madrid, in Cordoba, you had 38 degrees. We've had wildfires in Canada. We've had wildfires across Europe. We have the warmest day on record in July, the warmest month on record in July. Then now we have September, the biggest difference from pre-industrial. A lot of scientists are saying this is not just climate change. This is something we have tripped onto a different page here. And I think that's the big question right now, whether we have or we haven't. And so the view I take on from speaking to scientists in this area is that they say, or they believe, that basically what's happened right now is a combination of the following factors. So we've seen ongoing emissions from carbon. Yeah, we know about this. We've seen the onset of El Nino this year, but more importantly is the demise of La Nina. So for the last 3 or 4 years, we've had La Nina, which has kept global temperatures down. Normally, in the normal cycle of events, La Nina is followed by a neutral period and then El Nino. But we've had a straight from La Nina to El Nino, and this is something that's perhaps underappreciated in terms of its impact. We've just gone from suppressing temperatures to boosting them. We're not seeing the full value of the La Nina or the El Nino yet. By the early next year, that will really be pushing temperatures up. So we're seeing all this heat happening in the atmosphere and it's going into the oceans. We've seen strange things happening in Antarctica. That's natural variability, maybe it's something else. And the thing that people are talking a lot about is sulfur emissions from ships. Over the last number of years, there's been a big effort to clean up the ships, so they're putting out less sulfur. The argument from some scientists is that sulfur, that air pollution, was doing a job in keeping a lot of that heat away. Now, for the last 3 years, we don't have that sulfur. We've seen a rise in temperatures, particularly going into the ocean, and that's a concern as well. And also, lack of wind has been pushing sand from the Sahara. It normally pushes sand from the Sahara into the North Atlantic. That cools it as well. That hasn't happened this year either. So all these factors are happening together. Sorry, Caty, I feel like I'm giving a lecture. I want to ask you a question. But I just want to make one more point on this. Are we in this new era of faster warming, or are we just seeing something that was predicted? And I think the view, and the one I would support, is that we are seeing the very outer edges of what has been predicted. This is a chart from Michael Mann. He's a very well-known US scientist, and he compares what's happening now in this period here to what happened previously. And he says essentially it is warmer, it's increasingly warmer, but it's not statistically different or statistically significant from what went before. We are seeing the very top edge of the envelope, but we have not jumped into a new period just yet. But we could. I think that's the worry. So I guess the question from me to you, Caty, about this is, how do we tackle it? What are the keys to tackling climate change in the world as we know it right now?
So just to summarize it, I think that, of course, the first and the main key is phasing out fossil fuels. That's without any doubt the main key theme. And then, of course, we need to scale up. scaling up the renewable transition. And how do you do that? So just to cut a long story short, I would say you just tax what you don't want in this transition. And even talking about an international tax on fossil fuels, we put that money on investment and on subsidies to what you really want. In this case, is renewable energy efficiency. So that's phasing out, scaling up renewable transition. And then I would say one very important thing is accountability. Accountability for false solutions, solutions that I find out that are shifting the focus away to where it should be, and then accountability in general. I remember writing this a story very recently about there was a research about what the main multinational companies are doing for the environment. So when they release their annual report, so and the scientists just found that there was no accountability at all. It's like they said, I planted 1 million trees somewhere. Okay, fine, but do you know how is there has been any monitoring or any track about what happened with those trees? Did they grow? Did they create an ecosystem? Was there the carbon capture or storage that it was supposed to be? Nobody's tracking that, I mean, in most of the cases. So accountability is very important. And then we don't normally talk about this, but I think it's super important and it is ecosystem restoration. Ecosystem restoration plays a key role to combat climate change, and it's not only an effective way to do it, it's also very cheap. We also know that if a third of all the degraded ecosystem in the world is restored and protected, it could storage like half of the emissions we had put in the atmosphere because of human action since the Industrial Revolution. So that's huge. And then my last point will be multilateralism. Of course, all the international efforts to fight climate change are welcome since it is a global problem. So I think even when some people may think that COPs, UN climate summits, we call them COPs, Conference of the Parties, are useless. I think they're still important, and it's good that the world leaders meet once a year and look at each other and share, and at least they have to show what they had done to fight climate change. So I guess you think the same on this matter, since you've been covering COPs, same as me for a long time.
Indeed, yeah. We had competition today. See who started covering COPs. Caty wins. She started covering COPs in 2005. I was just a little boy then, so it was not easy. But yeah, we both covered that the political discussions about climate change for a long time, and we have different and occasionally similar views on the usefulness of this process. And it's something that we can touch on in a bit, perhaps, to get into the question of the COPs. I'm really keen to talk about solutions. I think solutions generally are where the big issue for us is. So, like I work for the BBC. Caty works for FA. The biggest problem I think we have right now is not so much climate change; it's how do we keep audiences interested in climate change, because every day it's the same story. Oh, another storm, another temperature record, another terrible thing happening. It's like, and it's climate change, it's climate change, it's climate change. And the message we get back from the audiences all the time is, guys, give us, look at Ukraine, you have Gaza. Is there any hope, agency in this at all? And I would argue that there is a lot of hope, and there are lots of things that we can that can be done, and that we should be pointing out to audiences that are actually, if not good news, then at least not awful news. And I made a list of some of them, and I think, for me, the first and most important one perhaps is solar power. The sun got us into this problem, and the sun can get us out of this problem. We have what we call big solar. So you have what's happening in China. China has taken 13 years to put in 500 gigawatts of solar power. Like that's 40% of all the solar panels in the world right now are in China. It's taken them 13 years to do that. They're going to double that in the next 3 years. So their intentions in terms of intervention on solar are huge. So much of that solar is actually going on rooftops. It's not big solar fields. It's on rooftops, factories, homes, residential areas. And there's another thing as well, which is, I would draw your attention to this chart, which is happening in the UK, and I think it's also happening in Spain and other countries as well, is what I can call secret solar. So if you look at this line here, this purple line here, this is the amount of gas being used in the UK this year to make electricity. So it's almost the same as 2020, the year of the pandemic. Yeah. So why is that? You know, nobody was working then. There was no factories. There was not that much gas used for electricity. Obviously, gas has gone up in price. One of the arguments is that more and more people in the UK are installing solar panels and getting their energy, their electricity, directly from those solar panels. So the demand for gas-powered electricity has gone down. Now, nobody can find out about this. It is a secret because the people who are buying these solar panels are not reporting to the government. They're not telling the government. There's no tariff. There's no money from the government. What we do know is that the number of solar panels that have been imported into the UK this year has doubled over the past 12 months. So that's a huge increase in that time. So we've got that. The other thing that's happening, of course, is electric cars. Everybody knows about electric cars. There's electric cars everywhere. In Norway last month, the new cars that they sold, 98% of them are electric. And this is the interesting price transaction that's happening with Tesla in the US. It's come down. The Tesla 3 is now 10% below what the average car price is. So with the money that Biden has put into the buying of new and second-hand cars, that market is going through the roof. So the other thing is batteries. You know, we're seeing batteries everywhere, batteries. And it's make a huge difference, you know. 15 years ago, South Australia, which is a very sunny part of Australia, got 1% of its energy, of its electricity from renewables. Now it's almost 100%. And a key part of that has been Elon Musk and his batteries. They installed 100 megawatts in 2017. They've added more ever since. They have put solar on more than half the rooftops in South Australia have electricity generating solar panels, and they have batteries to store it. And they're getting to the point now where they can, on half the days of the year, provide all their energy, all their electricity from renewable sources. Now, yes, I know you'll say South Australia is quite sunny and not that many people live there, and that's all true. But perhaps it's a lesson for the future for people. And I like this guy. His name is Jeff Simon. Yeah, he's called Jeff Simon. And he's, at the moment, he's a very, as you can see from his tie, a very successful lawyer in America. He won a $2 billion court case against Johnson & Johnson over the use of opium in their products in Texas. He's now running a bigger case. He's got big eyes. He's doing a $56 billion lawsuit against 17 different fossil fuel companies for the damage that was done in the state of Oregon, the number of people who died there. So it's this kind of guy going to court and making cases like that. He's not alone. There's about 2,000 law cases going on around the world at the moment. And a group of students in Fiji, backed by Vanuatu, they've asked the International Court of Justice to give an opinion on this. And if that comes out in favor of the climate, not using fossil fuels, that will be used in judgments all over the world. So I think this is one of the kind of things that people don't know about, this incredible thing that's happening with the law. And my final and best reason in some respects is politics. We're seeing changes in politics that we perhaps haven't seen before. Yeah. This is Claudia Sheinbaum. She's running for president, or going to be the next president of Mexico. And she's an environmentalist, an academic. She's going to have to make a big decision about oil or renewables and all that. But it shows you what's happening. We saw in Poland last week, we saw the Civic Coalition, a progressive coalition elected. We've seen elections in Australia and other countries. Yeah, I know we've seen a lot of other elections as well, which have not been so progressive. But there is a movement that young people are engaged with, and we're seeing it. I know, Caty, you were in the US 10 years ago. Was there much evidence of politics and climate change mixing at that point?
Yes, there was. I mean, there is a huge difference I've seen in the US. I was there covering the the last time that President Obama ran for president in 2012, and I wanted to write this story. There were three or two presidential debates in television, and I was counting how many times they said the word climate change or any environment-related word, and the answer was no time. I mean, they never even mentioned that on a debate, on any of the debates. So my story was, they didn't even mention that. So Biden at that time, he was vice president, he was part of the ticket, and look now, he's talking about climate change, and he's putting so much recovery money on clean energy, electric cars, all kind of, things that are good to combat climate change. And as part of the solutions that you just mentioned, and I would like to remember also from the religious point of view what Pope Francis said.
A good friend of yours.
Exactly, when updating his encyclica. He said, "We can keep hoping. The high temperatures are frightening, but it could be used by responsible politicians to build the momentum that is needed for an accelerated green transition." I would add not only politicians, but also the private sectors and citizens in general. I believe that us, as citizens, we could do a lot. We are part of the solution, and when we are together, we are in movements, we are aligned. This is how ordinary people can change things. We cannot underestimate that.
We talked earlier, you talked about the idea of social tipping points.
Exactly.
What does that mean, and how does it apply to climate change?
So it means, in fact, I was talking about that here a couple of years ago. And it's very interesting, and that's my main hope to combat climate change, because it is about change is not always linear. It's not always like that. So sometimes things happen, and they happen very fast, and then they change things the way we imagine, so faster than we imagine. So that could happen. I mean, there are like 7 or 6 social tipping points that have been observed that can really make a difference for climate change. Of course, one of them is electric mobility, most of what you mentioned before, but also social change. It's like just people coming together, being concerned, just voting for people who really want to combat climate change or whatever. And we've seen this, for example, with the women rights, with gay rights. We've seen how people together could change things or could do these alliances.
Does that include young people not buying cars?
Oh, exactly. Yes. As I was telling you before, I know more and more young people in Spain who don't think about buying a car even more. Like in our generation, most of the people we had a car when they got their first job, and this is changing now. So, and I think it's a great victory of the climate movement that people are more concerned now about climate change than they were before, including, of course, young people. And that's a strong victory. I think the climate activism movement has done great, and it will be doing great things in the future.
Is it all Greta?
Not all Greta.
Not all Greta, no.
But many more.
Every time we read a story with Greta, I mean, the engagement from young audiences is huge.
It's huge.
Yeah, it's huge. So Greta comes to London, gets arrested,
Of course.
Completely organically, not planned at all.
Yes.
And suddenly we write 2 stories about that, and millions of people read them.
Greta goes by train.
Greta goes by train, gets off, gets arrested.
Greta is vegan.
Greta is, yeah, exactly. That's it. Yeah.
That's another big change we've seen in young people, like being vegetarian or being vegan. Than before.
No, absolutely. I think that's we're seeing more and more evidence of that questions of diet are coming into the question more and more so. I don't know what the situation is here in Spain, but I know that in the UK we've had the government recently make some suggestions that it's not going to do as much on climate change. And one of the things they said they would do, that there would be no tax on meat. There'd be no tax on meat. Now, nobody suggested there would be a tax on meat, but the Prime Minister thought that if he said there would be no tax on meat, it would look good for the party. So, yeah, I think in general we're in a situation kind of where the rubber meets the road, where we're starting to move into real change rather than just talking about it. People are making decisions about cars. They're making decisions about heat pumps in their homes. They're making decisions about their future transport, what they're eating, their families. Are they going to fly? All these kind of things. So I think we're really into this real period of change, and it's really interesting. And I'm not sure anybody really knows how things are going to go.
Yes.
Hopefully they go in a way that doesn't destroy the planet.
I hope so. And then we have the politics.
Yeah, I thought we'd get to that some point. So I guess this guy. This is Dr. Sultan Al-Jaber. He's a man from the United Arab Emirates who is in charge of the COP28 talks this year. He's also the chair of the 12th largest oil company in the world, the Abu Dhabi National Oil Corporation. And he's also the chair of the renewable firm in Masdar. And also he's been a delegate for UAE for a decade. But when we talk about him, we generally only talk about the fact that he is the man from the oil company who's now running the climate talks. So there's lots of very mixed views on him, I think. People think, this is the ultimate takeover of climate discussions by the fossil fuel industry. Others say, look, if you want to make progress, you have to bring the fossil fuel industry with you. Who better than somebody who has a foot in both camps? So he's already circulated a document that he would like to see come out as the result out of COP28, and that would talk about renewable energy, tripling renewable energy, doubling energy efficiency. But the key question that everybody wants to know is, and he hasn't really said yet, is this mean the end of fossil fuels? Will we see text that people will agree, that every country will agree, that will say fossil fuels have to end by 2035, 2040? Or will we say more language like unabated fossil fuels, which means essentially fossil fuels, continue using fossil fuels, but with carbon capture and storage? Can you use those sort of things? So I think that's a really critical argument. And I think, unfortunately, what's happened in the world right now with Gaza and the continuing Ukraine and the cost of living crisis is how much political capital will leaders put into this process? How much will they engage with it, and whether or not we can see a major achievement? Because, as the scientists are telling us all the time, we're running out of time. So I don't know if what's your view on COP28, Caty? Do you think we'll see a big breakthrough?
Well, I think that this process, the climate change convention and the COPs, really light a candle for the multilateralism. So this convention was created in 1992, and they had been meeting every year except 2020, that it was impossible. And this is a success for multilateralism, and in the general context, but also in the environmental context, because at the time that the Climate Change Convention was created, the UN also created the Biodiversity Convention and then the Convention to fight desertification. And climate change probably has been the most successful.
Yes.
So I mean, it's good if they keep the meeting how it's being planned in spite of everything that is happening in the world. It will be it will be really nice thing to see, because still the problem is there. It's not because other things are happening. Climate change, has disappeared. And then going to this COP, in particular to COP28, I think that the key thing, and we know that, is phasing out fossil fuel. So we need a strong language on that. We definitely need a date for the phase out. I know that the most ambitious people or countries want 2030 for developed countries and 2040s for developing countries. So I think that will be difficult to reach with an oil country managing the negotiations. Of course, we will see. Then, of course, renewable, they need to triple the capacity that we have right now for 2030. And then we need double energy efficiency deployment on 2022 levels every year from now to 2030. And of course, there should be some agreement on accountability, and there should be some agreement on just and equitable transition. But then there is this thing of an oil man as president of a COP. And for me, and I want to know your opinion about this, is like the wolf looking after the sheep, or the mosquitoes looking after malaria. Yeah. And then he's also saying that fossil fuel should be part of the solution.
Exactly. I mean,
what do you think about that?
I've not met him, but I know colleagues who have, and there was a really brilliant interview with him in The Guardian last week with Fiona Harvey. And he said something in that which was interesting. He said a lot of things that were interesting in that. But one of the things he said was, well, it's not the producer's fault for the use of fossil fuels. It's the consumers. It's the people, it's you guys, it's me, it's everyone, it's all of us, that we're using their oil. We shouldn't be using their oil. How terrible of us. So I thought that was an interesting insight into his mind. And there's also the company he runs. I mean, I think what upsets people is that he hasn't stepped out of his job to be the director of the Abu Dhabi National Oil Company. He is continuing to do that job, as well as being the president of the COP. And his company is expected to increase, essentially double the amount of oil that they're going to produce between now and 2030. The number of people working for the company has gone over 30,000. They're huge. They've opened an office in Geneva. They do, they're expanding essentially at a time when we're phasing out fossil fuels. That doesn't seem to quite add up. On the other hand, you speak to political leaders, you speak to Rishi Sunak or John Kerry or anybody, and they ask them, what do you think of Sultan, Dr. Sultan, as he's called? And they say he's a man with a great proven track record. He speaks, he understands the issues. If anybody is going to lead the fossil fuel industry to a cleaner, greener future, perhaps he's the man. So I think you can look at it both ways. I think we'll see what happens, what comes out of it. I think it's a very difficult situation to predict. I think, because the attention of the world is elsewhere, I think, look, right now, they're arguing over where we're going to have the COP next year, because Russia says they don't want a European country to have it. So, this is where we're at. Rather than actually arguing about the disaster that we're heading into and the scientific one, they're arguing about where should we have the meeting to talk about the disaster. So it's a frustrating process, but Caty's right. It's something that's been going on for a long time. But I think history will look back on this and say, in this 10-year period between 2015, when we signed the Paris Agreement, and maybe 2025, the world really did start on this path of change. And I think, we will see what Dr. Sultan will bring. But I think there's a lot of pressure on him. And I think there's a lot of positive pressure to come up with something. What it is, I don't know.
And then we had this talking about fossil fuel lobbyists in the room. Again, we had this situation that so there had been many similarities between the climate change fight and the tobacco industry thing with the smoking in everywhere. So it's like fighting tobacco and fighting climate change. There are some similarities in how everything has developed. And from the beginning, from climate denials, they used the same people that said that like smoking was good, was healthy, it was good for you. They used the same people to deny climate change first, and then to deny that human cause climate change. So
yeah, it's interesting how their argument has shifted over the years from being a situation of it's not happening,
yes,
to couldn't possibly be fossil fuels. That's just crazy. It's sunspots or natural variability or the cycles of the earth, a whole range of things. To now where they're saying, okay, the climate is warming, but it's not a really serious problem.
Exactly.
It's
not as bad as they
It's not
say.
as bad as people are making it out to be. And, if we have to throw out our entire economy, that would be a bigger disaster than the climate change that we're going to see.
Right.
But I think each of those arguments, it's interesting that the pathway has changed, isn't it? It's now, how bad is it? They're accepting there's a problem, but they're still fighting back against it. And I think a lot of politicians, fortunately or unfortunately, are taking some refuge in that, and when things are getting difficult. And I think you point out the fossil fuel lobbyists at the COP. I think that's a big issue. There are hundreds of people who come from oil companies. Many of them come from their PR people designed to go there to try and influence the outcome. Even last year we had the faintly ridiculous sight of the chairman of BP, one of the biggest oil companies in the world, Bernard Looney, a fellow Irishman, coming to the COP as a delegate from Mauritania, where BP has a big gas reserve already. So he had to get a badge from the Mauritanian government to allow him to come in. It seems to make a mockery of the process. I know the UN is trying harder to stop the infiltration of people from fossil fuel backgrounds, or at least make it clear that people are from what arguments they're making.
Exactly, their affiliation.
Yeah, they're trying to do that to make it better. So we will again see how that pans out. There's going to be 40,000 people in Dubai at this meeting. And I think, where they come from, it'll be interesting to see if this will be any different or if it'll actually cut down the numbers.
Yes, I think that there is definitely a conflict of interest, and their presence should be restricted. And if not restricted, at least we should know their affiliation, because as the VP CEO that you just mentioned, he went to the COP as a delegate of a country, so he could basically enter to any discussion,
I think in fairness to him, I think he was there. I don't think it was his plan to come there, but I think he was put in a position where he had to take the badge. But it just shows you how easy it is to get a badge, to get access to the very top table. Yeah.
Yes. So last June, the UN Climate Convention announced that they were going to release the affiliation of every participant that goes to COP. I think that's a major step. But there should be more transparency about that, because, who can imagine that the tobacco industry is taking part in the public health decisions? It's like, no way. So the same can be applied here.
Indeed, absolutely. Should we take some questions from people if they want to ask some questions?
Yes, let's open the discussion.
To answer them.
¿Preguntas?
I will start just in case someone is shy. Okay, so you mentioned very briefly the just transition, and when you were, Matt, speaking about solutions, which I thought, well, first of all, thank you, because it was really great to listen to you both and have this sensation that we are have this positive message that I think we need a lot. But many of the technical solutions that you mentioned imply an investment. And I do not research on this sort of perception stuff. But my feeling is that people is thinking that taxing or they need to do some investments, like in electric cars or your own the new heating systems, the air pumps, and is a limitation for people with lower resources. So and my concern is that if this transition is not fair, it might take longer. So what is your view about these issues?
My personal view is that we need to move the direction of the money. So it's like we need to tax all these big...
I think he's very keen on taxes.
Taxes! But just to put the money on the things that we want. Of course, you were talking about heat pumps in Spain, which are aerothermia, which is very, for example, geothermal energy is very expensive right now, and there are some subsidies, but you need to have the money to pay for it, and then you get the money back 1 year or 2 years after. But first you need to have the money. So of course that's not available for everybody. So in that case, I think we should change the way of how how these subsidies are given. So you need to give the UK is doing that, in fact.
Yeah, exactly. So
you give the money before and then you do the investment. So then you can, so more people can have access to that.
Yeah, there are lots of different examples. It's a really good question. How, we're not going to be able to do any of this without money, and the people who are the vast majority of people don't have enough money to splash out on a new electric car or whatever it might be. The UK government is doing a thing to encourage people to do heat pumps. So even though in the last couple of weeks all the headlines in the paper have been saying that the UK government is rowing back on net zero and they don't like it and this is politics, but they've actually increased the amount of money for a heat pump. So they will give you £7,500 now to buy a new heat pump, which is considerable investment because, it's maybe more than half the cost. And there's no means test or anything for that. So you just have to apply for that and you get that money. As I said, in the United States, we have the situation where the government is spending large amounts of money again, encouraging people to buy electric cars. So there are efficiencies there. You talked earlier about Cathy's favorite subject, taxes. Like, everybody who goes on an airplane, aviation fuel, there is no tax on aviation fuel. So if you're trying to put sustainable aviation fuel in place, I get the emails from these guys every week saying, sustainable aviation fuel, it's the future. We're going to make it from corn. We're going to make it from they can't make any of it until they put a tax on the existing fossil fuels because they just can't compete on price. Exactly. Now, there's plans that there are various different plans from various developing country governments to put taxes on air passengers or put taxes on shipping. I mean, these are all, global taxes are very difficult to do, but the idea of a global tax on shipping is quite interesting also, given that 40% of what they carry is fossil fuels.
Exactly.
So, are we living in a time when governments have enough guts to put taxes on something like this or propose these type of taxes? I don't know. But it's certainly, we're in this position now where we need the money, not the ideas anymore, but the money is needed to make that transition.
Then I also think we need and sorry again, I'm talking about taxes. We need to tax CO2 tax in the border, because, for example, at the European Union, there are some things that we need to import from China because it's not worthy to produce them, or at least this is what they say. It's not worthy to produce them here. Because of what you have to pay for the pollution it implies. So, but it doesn't make sense, that you're still buying those things. So at least there should be a CO2 tax in the border. So it will be, they can compete at the same level.
Yeah, it's an interesting point.
Any more questions?
So, related to the last that you said, it seems that it is free, contaminating, right? My question was more about reduction. We haven't talked about reduction, and I believe that a happy life can happen reducing our materialism and the consumption of each of us. What do you think?
Yeah, that's a really interesting point. It's politically, it's what the Prime Minister of India, Mr. Modi, talks about every time he comes to COP. He comes and he says, you guys are doing great, but you're all consuming 3 times the amount of material that we're consuming in India. And he says, if you want to stop climate change, consume less. And we'll make less, and therefore, and he makes the same speech every year, and it's very interesting. And I think, are we reaching a point of kind of like peak stuff where we have enough of everything? It's interesting in France, they've just introduced this, I don't know if they have it in Spain also, where if you get your trousers repaired, they give you like 20 euros. The government will give you 20 euros to go to a local shop to get that done, So maybe we're starting to see some change or some shift in the idea that everything has to be new and we have to consume. I think you're absolutely right. It's one of those things. Governments don't like to talk about it because it's we want to encourage the economy to grow, and when we have an economic model that is built on growth, it's very difficult to say, do you know what? Maybe we should do less growth. It doesn't go down well with voters apparently. So.
Exactly. Yeah, we're starting to have the same thing with food in Spain, about food waste, which is also a big thing, not with clothes, I'm afraid. But I think it's a great idea. This is what circular economy is about. And this is what we definitely need to implement, because it's all about that.
Yeah, absolutely, completely. It's a good question. Thank you.
Somebody else? So I cannot see the question in here right now. Is there any question online?
What do you think about when you were speaking about the COP and about the different role of the countries, and particularly what is the role of developing countries? You spoke a lot about emission reductions, a little bit less about impacts and adaptation. So
Sure.
what do you think might also be important in this new COP in relation to the needs of those who are more vulnerable to climate change?
I think, yeah, it's a really good question. I think the simple answer is really is money. You know, money is the root of all evil, and it's the root of all success, perhaps, in climate circles as well, because we've had this promise of 100 billion a year from richer countries to poorer countries, which hadn't been delivered. That might be delivered this year. I think more importantly is this question of loss and damage. And loss and damage was agreed last year that richer countries would pay poorer countries to deal with the impacts. It always seemed crazy to me that you could have these events happening in the world, these storms, these terrible events impacting countries, and those countries there was no insurance they'd get, there was no money they'd get, and for decades this has been happening. Finally, last year there was an agreement on some sort of funding that would help those countries who have been impacted by the direct impacts of climate change. And now this year they're trying to find the money to put in that. So again, where are they going to get the money from? Who's going to put their hand in their pocket? Again, this is amazingly, all the very rich countries are relatively shy when it comes to funding these operations. I think they fear that they'll be on the hook for money for many decades to come. But I think perhaps this is one of the strengths that Dr. Sultan and the Middle Eastern countries may be able to bring some pressure to increase. I know they have, and I know that they are bringing more money to the table. So that may unlock some goodwill amongst those developing countries to be able to go with some of the bigger questions for the richer countries. So you may see some progress on that. I think that's unfortunately where we are now. It's going to come down to money.
Exactly.
Sadly.
Yeah, I do think the same. That's a good thing of having COPs in developing countries, because, of course, they will bring to the table the key things, the
Absolutely.
key points for them. And, that will be one of them. So, how can I see the questions?
Should I sing a song or something?
As far as I can see, there is no online questions.
Okay, we do see some of them. So they are in Spanish, so I will make them Spanish. Muchas gracias por la charla. Echamos en falta algunas otras soluciones, además de las que se han dicho. Poner un tope a la riqueza. I think this is an interesting point. Trabajar en justicia social, como se concluyó en el informe conjunto IPC-IPBES. Reducir el consumo, eso está en línea, yo creo que con la pregunta que hemos tenido antes en la sala. Cambiar el sistema de crecimiento también está un poco en esa línea. No sé si tenéis sobre esta alguna opinión en concreto sobre el tema de las emisiones mayores por parte de yo creo que individuos y países también más ricos.
I can see it now. Sorry about that. working for social justice, of course, reducing consumption that we were just talking about, and then the fourth point is changing. Changing the development system and decrease instead of increase.
Yeah, I mean, I think I think what the question kind of drives at is the fundamental unfairness of the world, which says the rich countries can use fossil fuels for 300 years, and the poorer countries, you must all stop by 2070.
Yeah.
It seems a bit unfair that everybody has built their economies on the use of these materials, and then we say to other people, stop, you must stop using them now. So, yeah, there's a certain, that question of justice, I think, has become more prevalent and more powerful over the last number of years, and I think we are seeing even from India, Prime Minister Modi again has suggested that richer countries now not just make net zero by 2050, they make it by 2040 or 2035 if they're possible, so that the countries like India and others can have longer to use fossil fuels as well. I think the problem scientifically comes with the rate of increase in countries like India and China and other developing economies such as Brazil and South Africa as well, where the rate of use of the fossil fuels is going up very rapidly, and perhaps with, again, finance to ensure a better and just transition that people can, like they're trying to do with South Africa, like they're trying to do with Vietnam and Indonesia, where those countries which use coal are being given large amounts of money or to move them away from those fossil fuels. So in this case of South Africa, it's 8 billion, in Indonesia it's 5 billion, where the coal plants are going to be closed down, alternative jobs found for those people who work on those coal industries. I mean, this is a clumsy attempt at social justice in the world. It's very difficult to do, but I think we may see with the COP some form of idea that the developing countries get longer, get fairer, get a better chance, whereas the richer countries will have to do more quickly. And again, this will come down to the difficult arguments and the difficult conversations between Joe Biden and other leaders.
Modi.
This has all come down to them in Modi and President Xi from China coming in the next few months, and maybe Mr. Putin from Russia as well, a major oil producer.
Yeah, I think combating climate change is fighting poverty and fighting inequality, because the people who contributed less to climate change, as we know, will be the people more affected by climate change. And of course, we know that in some part of the world, if we don't do anything, they will have very high temperatures.
But it's not just those people in those parts, it's affecting everybody as well. So that's
everybody, but they don't have air conditioning.
No, they don't have air conditioning.
They don't have the possibilities that we have.
Absolutely, but the damage that's done to governments, if they think it's a problem for poor people in faraway countries, that's no longer true. We know that here in Europe we can see the impacts. This summer, last summer, it's hurting economies, hurting real people. So, it is solving the problem benefits everybody, not just the people in poor countries. I appreciate that they have perhaps less to start with in that sense.
And then we also need to take into account that most of the people live in these tropical areas of the planet that are, and these are the ones who are going to suffer the most, these high temperatures, because it's not only high temperature, it's also a very high rate of humidity, and the combination is fatal. It's very bad. So again, this is totally unfair, and that's why we had this big responsibility in fighting climate change, but also in transferring all the technology and all the advances to them.
I think the solutions are there to this. Whether there's a political will to make these happen, to move that capital to poorer countries, to do swap debt for nature, to develop instruments like that are innovative and new ideas, to encourage the transfer of technology, the transfer of and money as well, to help those countries to develop in a way that is greener and cleaner. I mean, it's difficult, but not impossible.
It is, exactly. And we have a question related to that that says 1.2% of the people has 50% of the money in this world. There's lack of money. Why that 1.2%. Is that 1.2% going to want to finance the fight against climate change? I think they are, and we know some cases. Michael Bloomberg, for example, who is one of the richest persons in this world, who has put a lot of money on fighting climate change. I think they want for their own business sake. And they will do it for their own business.
Sense, isn't it? It's good business sense.
So just think about some of these major companies, where do they have their manufacturing? In countries that will be very affected by climate change, Bangladesh, south of India, and all these tropical areas that we were just talking about, where it will be impossible to live if we don't fight climate change because of the combination of high temperatures and humidity. So I think they will do it. They will put the money at the end. They are doing. Some of them are doing it now, but it will be more money, and that could be part of the social. That could be a social tipping point.
It could be
when they see their business at risk, which some of them are already seeing.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. Some companies are more enlightened in this area than others. They see that it's in their business interest. If they're selling T-shirts, they can't be made in factories where people can't work because it's too hot and too humid. If they're selling iPhones or whatever, they can't be made in a country where they recognise that there are material threats to them, but they also recognise that if we help these countries to develop in a way that's greener and cleaner, those audiences will be there for us in 50, 20, 30, 50 years, and they will buy our products. And it's a good investment in their own future if they help to speed that transition. Yes, as you say, there are individuals like Bloomberg and others who have given money to this. Perhaps more of them might be encouraged to do that with some sort of, your favourite word, tax on people on people doing more flying, something like that. Those ideas have been mooted before as well.
We have a very interesting question about public transport. It says, is it sustainable, an individual mobility or private mobility, even if it is electric, or should we just increase public transport use? What do you think?
I don't know. I think you have more experience of this in Spain than we do in terms of more subsidies for public transport. During the pandemic, etc.
We're seeing that now in Spain. As I was telling you, now in Madrid, where I live, public transportation, the monthly ticket costs about 20 euros. So everybody, me including, because I walk to everywhere, because I live downtown, we are using this monthly ticket, and we use public transport for everything. So maybe if we make public transport cheaper and affordable, and of course electric, that would be a great solution. And of course, then we will need private mobility for some things, and then we can have this car sharing thing, or we can have electric cars.
So you're going to put up taxes, Caty, and you're going to get rid of all cars as well?
Yes.
These are your solutions.
Cars that are not electric.
Cars that are not electric, no future.
And cars that we can share.
Cars that we can share.
I think that's the future.
What about if I wanted to buy my own car? Can I buy my own car in Caty World?
You can buy, but it has to be electric.
It has to be electric. Okay,
when the electric, not now, but maybe in 2 years. By 2025, you will be able.
I think it's a really interesting question, isn't it? I think it isn't. Do we invest more in better walking, better roadways, better cycling, more public transport, or do we restrict some form of ownership of the most polluting vehicles? Well, so that comes back to taxing the solutions again, or taxing the problem. So, it's interesting what's happened here in Spain. I think it's interesting in other countries as well that have tried to do this particular format. But I think ultimately, I feel that people will have to have some sense of ownership, because you buy electric car. Yeah, you buy an electric car. You can use that to power your house. You get 2 weeks power for your house out of your electric car. So
exactly.
It's not just a car anymore. It's a
battery.
It's a big battery as well. Yeah. So I think but I think people will still want to have a sense of some ownership. You think? Maybe not?
Maybe not in the future.
Wow. It's going to be very big changes.
Not in the near future, I think.
You think people will be happy to give it up?
In a decade or two, yeah.
Wow.
I'm sure it.
We'll see.
We'll see it. So we have two questions that could be related to each other. One of them is, what else can do companies like the BBC to fight climate pessimism? That's one.
Yeah.
And the other one is in Spanish, and it is about the role of media to avoid catastrophism. Because, as Carmen is saying, normally people don't want to take action when you are just, I would say they just don't want to continue reading. It is very, you have this very negative...
I think she pointed at this whole idea that people just give up trying as well.
Exactly.
And if you go on the internet, if you go on social media now, it's very hard to avoid, if you just come down from another planet and you looked at social media to find out what's happening in the world, you would think, oh my God, this world is going to end tomorrow. The scale of doomerist comments is huge. And an awful lot of them coming from young people who feel like there's nothing in this for them. And I think this is wrong and also incredibly sad. And I think it's incumbent on media in Spain and in the BBC elsewhere to ensure that we put a counter narrative to this idea that there is no hope, because I think there is hope.
Yes.
There's real change taking place. I mean, the way that we are seeing emissions being tackled, even they're still rising. They're rising in less quickly, and we are, I think, going to see a peak in emissions in the next couple of years. It's going to take time. This is it's literally an oil tanker. We're trying to turn an oil tanker here, and it is a slow business, but I think there is grounds for some optimism that progress is being made. Now, yes, the big question is speed, and because we're doing the things now that we should have done 20 years ago, that lag is going to impact people, and it's going to have costs for everybody on the planet. It's going to make things more expensive. It's going to be difficult, and in some parts of the world, it may take people's lives. But I do not think we're going to get to. I personally don't think we're going to get to a doomerist scenario. And I think it's our job as journalists to not dismiss this idea, but to look at it critically, and to look at what's happening critically, and to put out issues of questions of hope here. I think it's too important. It's just too important.
We must show the pathway, and the solutions and the possibilities, and we need to talk more about the victories. We are instead of being so pessimistic. The thing is that victories don't sell news sometimes,
and often you can't see those victories.
Exactly, and the reason why you cannot see them is because nothing was left behind. That coal plant or nuclear plant that you can say in the Basque Country that was never built, fracking that was banned, those trees that weren't cut. So there are many things, many victories. We cannot see them because nothing was left behind, because they didn't happen, and that's all because part of it is because of climate activism and because people went together and fight that.
Yeah, we can see the disasters very clearly, but as you say, the victories are much more. They're not so tangible.
Exactly.
And I think it's a very important point. I think, we have to make clear to people that those are actually victories. It reminds me that we need to. That's part of the messaging to people we need to give.
Yes, I like to. On my reporting, I like to write time to time about the nuclear movement and anti-nuclear movement in Spain. That was really, in fact, very successful here, including in the Basque Country. How they wanted to build nuclear plants all over Spain, and finally we only had 8 reactors, I think. So that was a major. Even when we had 8 reactors, people fought to have no more reactors. Fracking, they wanted to do fracking everywhere in Spain, here included, and it never happened. It was banned.
So what's so different about the fracking and the nuclear movement? Because in Germany, it's a similar situation. Even though they were in a crisis because of Ukraine, there was no move to keep those nuclear stations beyond a particular point. Similarly with fracking, even in the UK, I mean, it's now banned or essentially banned. So what is it about those particular environmental problems that seems to get more emotion from people than just talking about, I don't know, the end of the planet in a kind of a... What is it? Why are they so...
You know what? I think that with fracking or with nuclear, we could see how they could potentially destroy the environment that we love, you know, the beautiful environment surrounding us. We can clearly see that fracking is going to destroy that. Mining in Europe recently hasn't been very successful because of that as well, because we can see how bad that's going to be for our beautiful environment and planet and, you know, nature. While with climate change, it's not always that you could see the atmosphere and what's happening in the atmosphere. So,
and even the phrase climate change sounds like, I don't know, you know, sounds like maybe it's an okay thing.
Maybe it's okay, yeah,
maybe
exactly.
it's an okay thing, you know. I mean, I think it's interesting that perhaps we need to think about how we label these things. Fracking, the word fracking, who wants to support, you know, it's a terrible word, you know. It's
it is, I agree.
Yeah, it's a terrible word.
Global warming is a worse word than climate change,
I
think.
Yeah,
global warming.
But we don't use
but
that
you
much.
don't see global. I mean, we see now the impacts, of course.
Yeah.
It's not that like you can see a direct impact in a beautiful natural park. Like maybe you can see, potentially you can see with mining or with fracking or with nuclear. And yes, I think another thing we as journalists should do is keep telling how wonderful, how beautiful is this planet that we inherit. Not only was, but it still is in many places. So then we remember why we are fighting for, you know?
If we tell people that it's a beautiful place, Caty, they all just go there.
No,
they all just go there. They all just go there, and then they ruin it for everybody else.
Our editors won't want to...
They don't want to do a tourist piece.
They don't want to have these
just want to
pieces
say
because always...
They want a disaster story.
Exactly, they love disaster stories. We have so many questions now. Only maybe 10 minutes left. So communication, we've done that. What could we do as a society to worry citizens? Could we do as a society for the government to be awake and take action? What could we do?
I mean, I think governments are awake and they're responsive to this issue. We've seen in the UK that they've passed a law. I mean, passing laws is a good thing. They've done this in the UK, in Ireland, and other countries, many other countries as well, where it's now the law. So that is a powerful change that's taking place. But you know, it's not the same everywhere. And again, you know, what can we do to encourage those changes that governments need to take? I think again, it comes back to voters and political action, doesn't it? You know, it's like if politicians believe that people are going to go into a box and make an X or put a number next to a politician because they think they're positive on climate change, that's good thinking in terms of getting voters to do that, or getting politicians to act in the interests of on the climate. So I think it comes back to political action and actions of voters.
We have some question about nuclear, topic that we have recent. One of them is about, I mean, what do we think, or what is our view about the European Commission recognizing nuclear energy as a green energy?
Yeah, that's a tricky question, isn't it?
It's very tricky.
Yeah. So in the UK right now, they've decided that they want to, the government is going to invest in what are called SMRs, small modular reactors. So rather than having a big nuclear reactor there, they've commissioned a competition from a number of different companies, Rolls-Royce and others, to build models of small nuclear reactors that could power a city or whatever. So this is where they see the development going. Against all this, I suppose you have the question of fusion, nuclear fusion, promising great potential for energy, but without the problems of waste or explosiveness or danger like that. So there's a lot of money going into that as well. There's a lot of private money going into that as well. So I think that's an interesting question. You know, we're in a crisis situation, I suppose. We call it a climate emergency, climate crisis. Many people would be opposed to nuclear power on the basis that fundamentally, I suppose, morally, I think politicians generally, and maybe the bulk of the population in some countries, it's different from country to country, I think are open to the idea of nuclear. They've built new nuclear power. They're building new nukes in the UK. So I think, I don't think there's one answer to this. I think, yes, we will continue to need clean sources of power. Governments will decide that they're clean sources of power. And if they do, they'll put, even if you can argue about that, I think they will invest in nuclear into the future in the hope that fusion comes along and saves everybody.
I know. I think that right now, the reason why when we think about the energy transition, we think on renewable energy and on efficiency, of course, and not so much on nuclear, is because solar or wind or hydrogen or geothermal don't have such a big problems as nuclear has, especially, as you mentioned, what to do with the waste in the long term, which is a problem that the nuclear industry or the nuclear scientists hasn't been able to solve. So I think because of that is why nuclear is not so important in the equation, even if it is there is no CO2 emissions, or at least very little. And there is a new message. Work together with direct action and civil disobedience to change what the politicians are not able to change in more than 30 years. Demand more real democracy with tools like citizen assemblies. So this is a comment more than a question.
Yeah. The citizens' assembly idea is really useful, and it's worked very well in the UK. It's worked very well in Ireland on other questions apart from climate change. But I think, it's to be encouraged. I think the whole point of everything we do as journalists and everything we talk about is to try and say to people, look, this is all of us. This is everyone here. You should all take a part in trying to solve it. We're trying to encourage people not to be doomerist about it. We're trying to encourage people to look at the reality of it. And I think a citizens' assembly, they're a brilliant idea.
Yes.
And come up with really innovative solutions. So yeah, totally would agree with that. Okay,
so I will take the two last questions. One of them was the first question, but in fact, sorry, I didn't read it.
That's okay.
It's in Spanish and it's quite controversial. What do we think about the position of the izquierda, of the left parties, or the left parties in, I guess, Spain or in the world? I don't know. If we see more ideology than scientific evidence?
I'm not sure I'm qualified to answer on that question. I think this is certainly one for you, Caty.
Me neither. I don't feel qualified. I would just say that fighting climate change or just protecting the environment is not an ideology question, and it's not an ideology subject. It's not a subject of ideology. It has nothing to do with ideologies.
But isn't there a danger that it's becoming so politicized? Because if you look at the situation with farmers versus the green movement, and this is happening in a number of countries now where farmers are becoming more politicized against the green movement and what they perceive as an attack on their way of life.
Yes.
Again, there's a problem that might be here. It's certainly a problem in Ireland, I know as well.
I think there is a polarization, and that's really bad for the environment because it's not a question of ideology. It's a question of survival for us as a species and for the rest of the species in this world. So it has nothing to do with ideology, and it's so bad, it is so polarized because it has nothing to do with the left, nothing to do with the right. It's just about the health of us and the health of our own planet.
Perhaps those who don't want to see progress in this area are happy to increase the divisions.
Of course, and the polarization around that, and making this something is that this is something that occurs to the left parties or whatever.
To the right, yeah.
Nothing to do with that. I said it was the last question, but maybe I need to take this last one, and this will be the last. So we have another question before, and this is also this is a very hot topic in Spain at the moment, and very important concern, and I totally understand why. We had this concern about solar, not only solar, but also windmills being installed in very idyllic and wonderful landscape, which is as bad as this is arising. This question is bad for nature, and it's bad for biodiversity, and it's bad for the local territories. So do you have a view?
I can only recount what's happened in the UK, where there's a lot of people said, "Oh, we can't be putting down solar plants because this is good land. We need it for making food, or it's a beautiful place. We don't want to put it down."
Yes.
But the amount of solar in the UK, even on a high optimistic view, would be less than the number of golf courses. I mean, it's a small fraction of 1%. The wind turbines question, that has been more politically difficult as well. And in 2015, essentially, the government in the UK essentially banned wind turbines on land, and they've invested heavily on turbines at sea. Now they've rescinded that ban. So if local communities support the erection of wind turbines on land in the UK, that can now potentially happen again. But it gets at that question of, what you're looking at. Do you want to some people take the other view and they say, I like to see where the energy is coming from. I like to see the wind turbines on the horizon turning and making power. So yeah, I understand that it's controversial, and there's no easy solutions to this, is there? There's no easy questions, and we can't say, take them, you must have them. But on the other hand, look, it's critical for the future that we move to renewables quickly, and these are proven factors of delivering that energy that we need.
And then there is also this possibility. I remember when nuclear plant. Well, it's not only remember, we can still see in Spain about when the places where nuclear plants are, that. In these towns, these towns are getting a lot of money from the nuclear industry. So at least they are having some economical benefit from it. So I think local communities that have...
Yeah, this is one of the things that's been suggested as well, is that you give the local communities, they get free electricity.
They can have a free electricity,
free electricity,
or at least a share of...
a share of the company. And again, that with community solar, that's working really well. There are lots of communities. The law in the UK at the moment is difficult for local communities to consume their own power. It has to go into the grid. But I think, this is a change the government is hoping to make so that local communities can benefit more from local installations. And then we'll see whether people really want them or not, Exactly. I suppose that, the problem is if you're 30 miles away or 30 kilometers away and the community over there decides to put up 500 wind turbines, they may be getting free electricity, but your view might be a little bit restricted and you've got no free electricity. So it's a tricky
I agree. It's tricky, so there should be discussion and there should be a lot of dialogue about that. So the last question, I'm sorry.
You must have said that 10 times, Caty. It's like...
This will be the last. I guess that Matt has traveled a lot. In fact, you have, I think. Mm-hmm. Which countries are the most concerned about climate change?
Most concerned. If you go to parts of Africa where there are huge young populations and people are, they sell charcoal, they cut down trees, and they deforest areas to make charcoal to sell to make money, or they are impacted because they have no early warning systems for storms. I've seen that in Malawi and in Zambia to some extent as well. So poorer countries generally, unfortunately, are the ones who don't have these things. These are the things that can make a massive difference to everyone's lives. Like we had a storm in England today and in Ireland yesterday, and people are complaining because there was some flooding, but they had warning of it. In Mozambique a couple of years ago, they had a massive storm, no flooding. 10,000 people wiped off. We saw similarly in Libya last few months ago again, where no warnings and poorly built dams may have contributed to several thousand deaths as well in a storm situation. So the things I've seen in various countries are, it's poverty, it's lack of opportunity, it's a lack of investment, and it's, often poorer countries resorting to coal because that's what they're being sold by bigger countries who think that that's a good investment. That used to be the way of thinking. I'm hoping that's changing.
I have the same.
Yeah, good.
So I think we are already over 20 minutes, more than 20 minutes over this conversation. Would you like to say?
I'd just like to say thank you very much to everybody who've come here and for the really interesting questions we've had. It's been very, I'm involved in this because I'm a journalist and it's my job, it's my profession, but it's also I'm a human being. We live on the planet. We all want to make this a better place, and it's really interesting to get feedback from people, to hear what you think are important questions, what you think are the things we should be focusing on. So I always find these things really, really useful for me in terms of doing my job. So thank you for helping me to try and do a job better. And thank you for having this discussion with my good friend Caty in this wonderful place. It's been very enjoyable for me to take part in. Thank you.
For me too. Thank you very much. And I think we got an incredible input from the audience. And the message we want to leave is stay positive.
Yeah, absolutely.
The story is not yet written. We are writing it now. So
yeah, it's exciting in some respects. I know it's scary, but it's exciting too. The outcome could be not as bad as we. I hope. I more than hope. I believe that it will be better than we think, but it's going to be a lot of change for a lot of people.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.